So I saw that new Richard Jewell movie, and I want to talk about that movie, and I want to talk about Hollywood and media in general. Something that I found interesting about the Richard Jewell movie is that pretty much all the good guys in Richard Jewell had significant flaws. And I don't mean that the characters were written in a flawed way. I mean they were like real people, flawed people. Richard was slow. He was easy to take advantage of. His mother had zero emotional control. His lawyer was not a perfect guy, to say the least. But before I get into the lawyer, Watson Bryant, and Nadia, his woman, let's talk about Hollywood. So Hollywood films today are nearly all ideologically driven in a certain direction, right? They're very anti-traditional, for one. Do you remember the film The Shape of Water? That was released a couple years ago. And the most evil character in the film was a white, heterosexual, married man in a nuclear family raising children, right? The heroes were composed of a disabled, single white woman. She wasn't heterosexual. She fell in love with something of a different species, this animal monster thing. Her sidekicks did include a married, that's -1 point, black woman, that's +2 points, and also a white male, that's -2 points, but he was a single homosexual, so it evens out there. And even the husband of the black female sidekick, he didn't escape. He is black, that's +1, but he's a heterosexual married man after all, so while he wasn't too bad, he did collude with the bad guys, and he was sort of portrayed as this sort of sitting on the couch husband, sort of like a Homer Simpson. Now, you might come at me if I describe the movie The Shape of Water this way, and you might say, oh, come on, this is possibly just a coincidence. Maybe the villains only happen to be portrayed as traditional white heterosexual men who have families, and the heroes only happen to be disabled, only happen to be gay, women. And, I might have agreed with you at one point, but we know from interviews, people working on the movie, like the director, that they chose to make the film this way because this is what they wanted. In an interview, Del Toro, the director, he was asked, quote, "Your film offers quite a damning indictment of heterosexual relationships." And he responded, quote, "Yes. The idea for me is that there is more power play and more submission in the relationship between Strickland and his wife. He's screwing her and covering her face. Zelda and her husband are in stasis. She hasn't talked to him in years. She just cooks. The question for me is, can we find beauty in the alternative possibilities that life offers us?" End quote. So it's clear the heterosexual relationships, these are power plays. They're about submission. They're abusive. This is about finding the beauty in alternative possibilities, which does include bestiality in the movie. Del Toro, in another interview, talked about how bad American history is. Quote, "If you were a minority, you didn't have it very easy. If you were not a man, a wasp, and a heterosexual man, then things were very different." End quote. So this movie, The Shape of Water, was about reimagining Cold War-era America as a place where the white heterosexual men were in charge, were less intelligent than they thought, and they couldn't compete against these courageous women and minorities. Now, this is not an accident. This is not any more of an accident than all those television commercials you see where white men are dumb. Dumb white husbands, stupid white dads burning the food while their young daughter rolls her eyes in disgust at her dad. This is intentional. It's happening all the time. Now, this is why I don't like to watch Hollywood films, because it's the same tropes as the TV commercials, right? It's all a very anti-white, anti-male, anti-heterosexual, anti-natalist, anti-traditional. But instead of sitting through 30 seconds of it, you sit through like 90 minutes of it. Now, before I get into the actual movie Richard Jewell, what do you think I saw in the previews right before the movie? And if you saw Richard Jewell, did you pay attention to those previews? Because here's what I saw. I wrote it down on my phone kind of quick while I was watching. The first preview was a white man going on an adventure with a dog. Okay. The second preview was callous white men victimizing non-white people. And then in the third preview, I saw courageous white women standing up against evil white men who had done bad things to them and other people. In the last preview, I saw a broken white man with his life in shatters. He managed to pull his life together with the help of wonderful non-white people. I didn't see any positive white men raising families. In none of the previews did I ever see white women united with white men. The films, the previews, the television commercials, they're often made by the same people, the same approval board, some of the same writers, directors. It's not always the same, but a lot of these people, they might be friends. They're of the same Hollywood culture. Sometimes people will say, hey, it really is a small world. Well, if you're in Hollywood and working in that tiny niche of society, it is a really small world. So Richard Jewell turns a lot of things on its head from the typical Hollywood experience. It's unlike your average Hollywood film in a lot of ways. Now let's look at Watson Bryant, which was Richard Jewell's lawyer, and Nadia. Now, Watson Bryant was not a perfect man. In the beginning of the movie, he's in someone else's law firm, and then he sort of creates his own law firm. And when he's running his own law firm, he's sleeping at his desk. He's sitting at the desk in his underwear. He's not always taking things seriously. He's out of the office with his phone off so people can't reach him. Watson was not diligent, certainly not conscientious. He was probably not super responsible, and the way I interpreted his lackadaisical personality was that's probably part of the reason why he's no longer with his previous law firm. Now, this character, whether he was irresponsible or lazy, whatever criticism we want to lodge against him, once he finally understood the situation Richard Jewell was in, how bad Richard Jewell needed him, he got in there and did what he needed to do. He was with Richard Jewell and Richard's family basically for the rest of the movie, never sitting in his office and certainly always dressed. We could still say, even when he really buckled down and got in there, he was still an imperfect man. There was that one scene in the movie where he leaves Richard Jewell's side to go talk to the media while the FBI is looking through Richard Jewell's home. Now, this is when the FBI tricks Richard Jewell into recording his voice. Now, we could say, hey, well, he shouldn't have left Richard's side, but he was trying to do a good thing. He thought he needed to make a statement to the media to lessen the pressure. After all, if this goes to court, it's almost unavoidable at this point that someone on the jury will have seen the coverage, so he needs to be doing something with the media as well. But regardless of whether it was the right decision or not, once he knows Richard's situation, we don't see him ever at the office again. And Nadia is a big part of this, right? She loves him. She's dedicated to him. She understands how great he can be, obviously, and she encourages that to come out in him. You might remember when she tries to tell him how big of a deal this Richard Jewell thing is, and she insists that he tries to call Richard at the FBI office. Now, clearly, she sees his weakness. It's displayed right in front of her. She's in the room with him. But she encourages him to reach his potential, and she sees what he can be. This is important because that's not how relationships are often depicted in modern media, right? She loves him for what he is and what he can be, and she's there to back him up wholeheartedly. She's not the same sort of shrill, nagging, men are awful, and my husband is awful kind of person. They weren't married yet at that point in the movie. Just because he has flaws, and those flaws are being very apparent, that doesn't mean she withdraws that love, right? If we all withdraw all of our love from the people in our lives just because of their flaws, well, there won't be much love in this world. No one's going to love you, and you will love no one, unless you really think you're flawless. Now, so she's not the exasperated nagger that modern women are often encouraged to be by the media because their men can't live up to the expectations. Their men can't be the prince to the princess they've always been told that they are. So to me, a big lesson in this movie was about accepting the flaws in the people around you, especially the people you love. And we saw that with Nadia accepting Watson Bryant's flaws, but also, and I think another scene where this is really shown well, not between Watson Bryant and Nadia, but between Watson Bryant and Richard Jewell, is Watson Bryant has been admonishing Richard Jewell over and over, telling him to do better, stop cooperating with the FBI, stay quiet, stop volunteering things that could get you deeper in trouble. And Richard yells back saying he can't be a different man than he is. And for the rest of that movie, that had an impact on Watson Bryant's behavior. Watson Bryant never came down on Richard the same way after that. Not because he had become apathetic. He hadn't given up on Richard at that point. He knew that Richard was right. He can't make Richard be the kind of guy that he wants Richard to be. This lesson is, if you take people into your life, these people are real flawed people. If you just choose to get more and more frustrated because of some sort of flaw you perceive, and you push and push and push for them to change it, when they can't, you'll only build resentment. Watson was faced with this situation. He realized, my client's a flawed man. I'm going to have to accept these types of flaws that he has. I'm an educated lawyer. I'll do what I can to make up for those shortcomings on my end, because that's something I can do as a lawyer. And that's what we see for the rest of that movie. After that outburst with Richard, for the rest of the time, he's accepting the Richardness of Richard, and he's sort of going around the back end and trying to make it better. And I'll tell you, one of the lessons I've learned in my life that resonates with this movie is that when two people are in a relationship, it doesn't matter what kind of relationship, one person can really decide to improve it if they want to. Now, you can't fully change the dynamic of every relationship you're in because you don't control everything, but you, as one person, can change things quite significantly, even if the other person doesn't realize what's happening or isn't really sure what you're doing. And I think this movie showed that big time between Watson and Jewell. There's another thing I saw in Richard Jewell that is unlike what I normally see in Hollywood. In modern Hollywood, the aggressive career woman can do no wrong. By comparison, in Hollywood, often the straight, white, married woman who has children and she's focused on her children, maybe she's only working part-time, she's looked down upon. You're only a mom. You're not doing a real thing in the real world, that they'll say about her. Now, this Kathy Scruggs in the movie, she's a boisterous, go-getter career woman, and she uses her sexuality as a tool, right? A truly empowered modern woman. How many times have you seen a character like Penny use sexuality and sexiness to exploit or attempt to influence the nerds on The Big Bang Theory? Or how about Elliot and Carla on Scrubs using their feminine wiles to get what they want out of JD and Turk? Even Elaine from Seinfeld, which was not a particularly sexy television show from the late 80s to the late 90s, she knew how to use her womanly goods as a tool against men.
Ketchup secret?
No, I don't have a ketchup secret.
Because, if you do have a ketchup secret, I would really like to know what it is.
Hollywood loves the woman who is sexy, knows she's sexy, and uses it to get what she wants from all these men who have brains that are smaller than their heads. And she, through her actions, this Kathy Scruggs character, uses her sexuality in the way they celebrate it, and she ends up creating incredible harm. When I saw that, I was surprised. I thought, like, oh, wow, this no way. I didn't expect that at all. But I thought to myself, okay, well, so they let her do that bad thing. Of course, she's going to get a redemption arc, right? They're going to let her see the errors of her ways, and she's going to be able to undo the damage, maybe even be a hero. She'll be part of the good guys, maybe even one of the best good guys. But in this movie, that didn't happen. And I think that's an amazing message. And in real life, there often is no redemption arc. We can't always make up for the bad stuff we've done. You did it. It was bad. We're all worse off because of it. And you can't take it back, so it's time to move on. Now, when the character Kathy watched Bobby cry and plead to the president for help, she felt guilty, and that was it. That's all she ever got. And if you did see the movie, there was one moment that I just wanted to mention because I thought it was so powerful. It was probably, in my mind, one of the most impactful moments of the film that was done really well. I don't have necessarily a big political commentary to go along with it, but in Richard Jewell's nightmare, the package was on the ground. It was going to blow up in that sort of mohawk shape, not the big saucer shape because it got knocked on the ground in the movie. So this mohawk shape. So Jewell lays next to it, putting his body in front of the mohawk, which would protect the crowd. And then he puts his head on top of it. He puts his head on the chopping block, submitting to death. The death that he wished for in his dream to avoid the hell that his life had actually become. Now, if that's not powerful, I don't know what was. I was blown away when I saw that. Thought it was great. And I've read some reviews on this movie, and I was quite amused to hear a lot of these movie reviewers, they were surprised that the FBI had tried that hard to pin this thing on Jewell. They tried to trick him into making statements of guilt and getting him to record these things. And they were surprised, these movie reviewers. A lot of young, liberal movie reviewers, I'm guessing. These people have never heard of MK Ultra, Ruby Ridge, Waco. If you were shocked about this idea of how the government treated Jewell, you're in a bubble. You have not learned about how our government system operates. Our government system has given people drugs without them knowing, shot them dead in front of their families, and burned children alive. Think about this. Maybe you don't remember the debates after 9/11. We had a couple big debates happening at the same time. Debate number one, can the government torture suspected terrorists? Waterboarding was a big issue. And of course, our sort of offshore, but our detention facilities, Guantanamo Bay and whatnot. And the second big debate was, can the government put citizens on a terrorist watch list and curtail their freedoms and detain them even if no court has found them guilty of anything at all? Put two and two together. Do you think that your countrymen haven't gone through much worse than Richard Jewell? Because some of them have. Now, I'm not saying Richard Jewell is a masterpiece, but if this movie seemed interesting to you, it's a good bet. I'll give it 4 stars out of 5. It's certainly better than most Hollywood trash.